Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Aero League Racing Tier 1. My name is Aman, and I will be your commentator for this season. You join me all at a track we are all very, very familiar with. We're heading down to Sao Paulo, Brazil for the first race of Season 12. A lot of action in store for everyone in here today. Hello, Said. Good to see you as always. And yeah, we should be getting underway very, very soon. So until then, make sure you're all comfortable. Get yourself something to eat or drink. Maybe grab a loved one, and we will all be getting underway very, very soon. Right then, ladies and gentlemen, while we have some time before the race gets underway, why not discuss this track and Season 12? A lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces heading into this season. So it'll be interesting to see who comes out on top. One of the prominent figures, obviously, Paul House, a two-time champion with Tier 1 for ALR, will be looking to three-peat it this time around. Will he be able to do so? We will have to see. Obviously, we had some new faces in here in the forms of Pyro, who was in commentary here last season, but has now been promoted up into Tier 1 for racing. So I know there's some big shoes to fill in there, so I hope I'll be able to do that for you all today. Speaking of the track, Brazil, it's a track everybody knows, a track a lot of drivers are, I want to say, very, very familiar with. 36 laps around here. There is a high chance for rain, as there always is in Brazil. Lap times we're going to be expecting roughly between the 107s and 108s. A good lap time would be roughly around 107.3, 107.2. So let's keep our eyes out for that. I believe there are going to be 15 or 16 drivers that are going to be racing in here today, so we got to wait for just two more drivers, I believe, and then we should be getting started very, very soon. Yeah, not much more else to add. I think we have just a great lineup for the season as well, so a bunch of really, really fun tracks to commentate over, especially to race on, I'm sure. So, until then, until this race at least begins. Just, I think we only have a few more minutes now. Or, as a matter of fact, I think Paul House has actually given the go ahead. I don't think we're waiting for any more drivers. So we're all set to get the first race of the season at Brazil underway. I hope you're all excited as much as I am. I know we have a lot to look forward to here today. Right, and as we get short quality underway, let's take a look and see who will be the first driver to step out. We do seem like we have a few gray clouds in the area, so we'll have to see as the session progresses if there's any chance of rain either in qualifying or in the race. I guess probably not. And while I have the chance, we should probably set up the details in telemetry. Right. So then, new season, obviously same cars, a few new drivers. Who will be the first driver to step out and set the first few laps? We have the Ferrari coming out, and oh, actually, never mind, the Alpine setting out first, and it seems to be the Alpine of, I believe that is Steba. So Steva will be the first car out on track at the moment, and assuming that he keeps his position of being the first car out on track, he will be the first driver to set the first lap time here at Brazil. So we'll ride on board with him and see how he progresses. Warming up his tires left and right. We can see the Ferrari of Ishtar right behind him, coming up very closely. We have the Mercedes, it seems like, of Stell, followed by the McLaren of Adam coming out next. But for now, our attention will continue to stay on Steba. Hello Stell, best of luck for your race, man. I hope you do fantastic. Good luck Tier 1 as always. The blessed Saeed coming in to provide his blessings. Where would we be without that? But back to the action at hand. Steba, on the other hand, currently going through Sector 2, going through the end of Sector 2, as I should say, and now has begun Sector 3. Coming through this long left-hander, followed by, which comes right before the first DRS zone, which also does go through the start-finish straight. We'll keep an eye on him and see what kind of lap times he can set. And now, for the first time, Steba begins the first lap time here in Season 12 of ALR. Comes into Turn 1. Keeps it nice and tidy. Obviously, with Tier 1, these drivers are going to be a lot faster than the rest of the tiers. And unfortunately, Steba, invalidates his first lap. So that is not the exact start he will be looking for. So our attention will go straight towards Ishtar, who hasn't managed to invalidate his lap time. Looking as he's going through the second DRS zone, obviously sets a purple Sector 1, but that's because he is the first car out on track at this current stage. And how will he progress through Sector 2? Let's keep an eye on him. It's very easy to lose the car in a track like Brazil. Obviously, your setups in time trial don't necessarily translate well into the race, so drivers are going to have to find a setup that works perfectly for them, which obviously can be a struggle considering it's hard to get practice in like that. But as we watch Ishtar coming towards the end of Sector 2, let's see what times he's setting up. Has so far set up a 51.5. Seems to be on decent pace. Will he abandon his lap? No, he does not. Ishtar is the first car to come across the line and set the first lap time of the session. Sets a 108.0. And manages to take provisional pole, but will any other driver have anything to say about that? We can see Adam now. We do have the Mercedes of Stell actually coming across the line before him. Manages to set himself a 108.1. Can't steal provisional pole away from Ishtar just as yet. Adam comes across the line and sets a 108.4 and manages to take P3. And that is the current standings of your top 3 at this current stage. We can see Ella on the other hand following very closely behind his Mercedes teammate. What will he do here? He has probably begun his time lap, trying to get some slipstream off of him. That's some good teamwork from the Mercedes drivers. We do have a yellow flag in Sector 3. That seemed to be the Aston Martin of Elite, I want to say. Oh no, not Elite. It was I want to say Typos. Regardless, we can see Big Bambino has actually managed to take provisional pole by 0.4 of a second. 107.6 setting the bar for the rest of the grid. We can see Spectre has managed to set a 108.1, putting himself up into P4. Jacko Lacko, meanwhile, in P6 with a 108.2, and Steba in the Alpine. I'm sorry, I completely stuttered over myself there. Is currently sitting in P2 with a 108.0. And now for the main attention, Paul House is now beginning his outlap. Obviously, a 2-time winner with Tier 1. Will be looking to make it 3 times, and would love to get off to a flying start for the first race of the season. We'll have to see how he progresses. Ella comes across the line, manages to set a 116.1, so not a fantastic lap from him by any stretch of the means. BR4 unfortunately invalidates his lap time and decides to go for a second run by the looks of it, as most of the drivers now come back into the pits to switch onto a new compounded tire and fuel up their cars once again. So while these drivers are going back into the pits and we've had the first few runs out of the way, we can see Steba actually going for a second run by the looks of it. Actually, he's gone very, very slowly through that section, 1.8 seconds behind on his current lap time, so maybe opting to just go back into the pits at the end of this lap. Meanwhile, Paul House, coming towards the end of Sector 2, has not invalidated his lap time just as yet. Ooh, goes massively onto the curves there, but managed to keep his car nice and tidy. And as he approaches the final straight, what time will the 2-time champion set for us? Let's take a look here. Coming across the line, Paul House manages to set a 107.7, so it's not enough to take provisional pole from Big Bambino, but it seems like Paul House has managed to push himself up into P2. only a tenth roughly behind the behind Big Bambino. Meanwhile, BR4, who did unfortunately invalidate his first lap time and decided to go for a second run, has decided to abandon that second run and decided to go straight back into the pits, possibly fleeing because his lap time was just not good enough. Meanwhile, let's take a look at Jaguar, who's I believe setting his first lap time of the session, currently out on a run at this moment. So now, comes across sector 2 of 51.8, I believe I saw. And now Jaguar, currently P14, dead last on the grid. What time will he set? Manages to set a 1:08.7, so nothing fantastic from him either, as he promotes himself up into P11. And unfortunately, does not look like he's going to be contending with the top runners anytime soon. Meanwhile, Big Bambino is currently out on his outlap. He is currently on provisional pole. We'll be looking to extend that gap, considering 1/10 is not a whole lot of time to be gained, especially not on a track like Brazil. There's a bunch of drivers now come out for their second runs. Let's see who's actually first. Is he? It seems like Stell has invalidated his current lap time, but that was most likely his outlap as he begins his time lap here. So what will Stell be able to do? Currently sitting in P7 with a 108.1. Will need to improve considerably if he's looking to challenge the top few runners. And assuming that he can find enough traction on track at this moment, after obviously a few drivers set in the rubber, he may be looking to do just that. Currently 2,500s behind on his current lap time, on his previous lap time. So it's not a fantastic start for the Mercedes driver. Let's keep an eye on him and see as he improves his lap time. We can see the McLaren getting out of the way there to not cause any issues for the Mercedes driver. And once again, the McLaren driver causing yellow flags, but that's only to not get in the way of anybody else. So let's see if Stell is currently up on his lap time as he comes through the end of Sector 2, roughly 0.04 of a second up on his previous lap time. So not a massive improvement, but it may just be enough to maybe possibly push him up a position into P6, assuming that he doesn't gain a whole load of time through this final section. And he sets a 107.9. Holy hell, where did he get those last few tenths from? That was incredible. And he manages to promote himself up into P3. It seems that Sector 3 for Stell was incredibly weak there as he manages to promote himself up pretty well. Meanwhile, Trocker currently going through his Sector 3. Let's see what lap times he'll be able to set. Currently sitting P6 with a 108.0. Comes across the line. Trocker does manage to set a 108.036. Only improving by half a tenth, but manages to promote himself up into P4. Look down a bit, rest of the grid, we can see Steba managing to set a 107.9 and also managing to promote himself up into P3. Ishtar, on the other hand, the second Ferrari driver, is now beginning his lap time by the looks of it. Okay. Unfortunately for Elite Spectre on his current run, it doesn't seem like he's managing to push any incredible lap time. Seems like he was down on his previous lap time. Just a little bit. Is that Ella? No, that is Stell. Okay. And Tipos or Typos and the Aston Martin driver deciding to go back into the pits, chooses to abandon his lap, maybe feeling it's just not fast enough on this occasion. And Ishtar's unfortunately gone off. Ishtar may have lost the car there, or may have just been getting out of the way for his teammate Paul House as he's coming around the corner. Not too sure what happened there. Unfortunately, I don't think Ishtar was on a run, or if he was, that's definitely going to be the end of it. Looking up the grid, we can see Elite has now begun his second run. And Ella as well. What about Pyro? What will Pyro do here? Pyro actually opting to come back into the pits. Obviously, Pyro getting promoted up from Tier 2 to Tier 1. We'll keep an eye on him through the season, see how he progresses. So a few drivers now opting to come back into the pits as their second runs have now come to an end. And at our current stage, as we're halfway through the qualifying session, we can see Big Bambino currently sitting in provisional pole with a 107.6. Paul House with a 107.7 sitting very closely behind him, and Steba with a 107.9 currently in P3. BR4 currently the only driver out on track who hasn't set a actual lap time yet, so let's just spectate him and see how he does. Coming through sector 2, sets a 51.1 for himself. We do have a yellow flag in sector 2 and 3. That does seem to be the Mercedes. I'm not too sure. It seems to be the Mercedes of Ella, as a matter of fact. But regardless, BR4 comes across the line. What will he set? He manages to set a 107.7 and manages to take P2 from Paul House. And BR4 now sitting very, very close to Big Bambino. Obviously, Paul House and BR4 being separated by roughly 0.02 of a second. Incredible stuff here from these Tier 1 drivers. And we've already got a fight in the first race of the season. Obviously, it would be the ideal start for any driver to go through to have the perfect start for their season, as it sets them off well for the rest of the races that come our way. Oh, and never mind, Paul House actually taking provisional pole right back from Big Bambino, manages to set a 107.5, a tenth faster than, not even a tenth faster, almost roughly 0.02 faster than Big Bambino. And Paul House showing why he is the two-time F1 ALR Tier 1 champion. So will any driver be able to bounce back? We will have to see. We can see Big Bambino has unfortunately invalidated his lap time, as he's most likely going to be coming into the pits this lap. Steba is now headed out for his outlap on the other hand. Meanwhile, we can see Stella is now on his own flyer of his own, currently P5 with a 107.9. Roughly 4 tenths behind provisional pole. Will he be able to find the time? We'll have to see. He has already found a tenth and a half through sector 1. So he's looking like he's on incredibly good pace. We can see Paul House's teammate Ishtar is also on his outlap at this current stage. Would not want to be left behind by his teammate. As we watch Stell coming through the end of Sector 2, he is 2 tenths up on his time, currently a purple Sector 2 as well. So given at the pace he's going, we'll have to see where he ends up on the board. DRS wide open as he sticks it as close to the left as possible to minimize the track distance to the start-finish line. And he manages to set a 107.7, managing to promote himself up into the top 3. So a fantastic lap from him. Meanwhile, Steba on a lap of his own, currently 2 tenths up on his previous lap time, actually takes purple sector 2 from Stell. Steba currently sitting with a 107.9. Where will he promote himself? Comes across the line. Steba manages to go a 107.6 and now manages to take P3 from Stell. So as it goes at this current moment, with Paul House sitting in P1, it goes Paul House, Big Bambino, and Steba. Oh, and Ishtar spun it. Ishtar's completely spun it in Sector 2. He was not wanting to be left behind by his teammate, and unfortunately may have pushed a little too hard on this occasion and has unfortunately lost his car. That's going to be the end of his run at this current stage. He's definitely going to have to come back into the pits and switch off of those tires if he looks to make it in time for his third run. But that's very, very unfortunate for the Ferrari driver as he is slowly coming through the end of Sector 2. We can see Jaguar on the other hand on his run, maybe actually starting his run pretty late into the qualifying session, I want to say. And it seems Steba is very nicely taking his time as he heads back towards the pits. Right, and ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be all. Well, Mitchell looks quick as ever. Ishtar professional bin man. Yeah, no, Mitchell obviously currently setting the bar for the rest of the grid, but as I was saying, that's going to be the end of the second run for most of the drivers, as all of them have now come back into the pits, almost all of them other than Jaguar, and we can see Big Bambino, who's currently out on his outlap. As drivers get ready for their third and final run, with only 3 minutes left to go in the session, who will be the one to come out on top and set pole position for the first race of the season? We will have to see. Big Bambino is obviously going to be the first driver out on track. It's going to have to be careful that he doesn't run into any sort of traffic. We can see that there is an Aston Martin out, and that is the Aston Martin of Elite, followed by what I'm assuming is the Mercedes of Ella. But our intention will stay on Big Bambino. So at this current moment, Big Bambino needs roughly, I want to say, 200ths of a second just to catch up to Paul House. Will he be able to find the time? Let's take a look. There's only 2 minutes left on the clock, and it doesn't seem like Paul House is coming out for another run. Maybe feeling very confident with the lap time that he's currently set, thinking that he doesn't need to do any more than that. And I'm not too sure what Big Bambino is doing, currently going through that entire section in 6th gear. I'm not too sure if that's the wisest idea. Regardless, let's take a look at how he progresses through this session. Oh, and he's actually opting to not use any of his battery or the DRS. Is he opting to go for a second run to maybe just warm up the tires? We'll have to see. Regardless, let's take a look at Ella, who has actually is also opting to warm up his tires. So these drivers opting to take a lap to just warm up their tires and get them ready for another push lap by the looks of it. Paul House, who is currently on provisional pole, will definitely not be able to make it to the line. Oh no, he is out on track. Oh, he is on an out lap. Never mind. So Paul House opting to not go for a push, not going for a warm-up lap, and actually choosing to go straight for his push lap right on the get-go. So we'll have to see how this goes for him, as he has to stop and make way for a few of the drivers. So Big Bambino, what will you be able to do? DRS wide open as he begins his final run here at Brazil. What time will he set? Let's take a look. And as he begins his lap time, heads down into turn 1. If he can manage to keep it nice and tidy, that will be one of the more difficult sections of this track to get over and done with, and he has. Coming through sector 1, DRS wide open, and coming through towards the end of sector 1. He is roughly 3/10 down on his time as Elite actually manages to take provisional pole, and has managed to take provisional pole by roughly 500ths of a second with a 107.54. So Paul House is definitely going to have to respond to that. We do have a yellow flag in Sector 2, and that is a McLaren by the looks of it. And we have another yellow flag in Sector 1 and 2. Bambino, unfortunately, does not seem like he's on a rapid lap time. Was roughly 3/10 down on his lap time. And Trocker is unfortunately retired from the session. What's happened there? Maybe he's opted that that's the end of his run. Stell will unfortunately not be improving on this occasion. And we'll have to see how Big Bambino bounces back from this. DRS wide open. Will he be making a dive down the pits? Yes, he will. Decides to abandon his lap and feels like that's just not enough. Meanwhile, Paul House roughly 500ths of a second up on his time. Will Paul House be able to take provisional pole away from Elite? We will have to see as he approaches the DRS. DRS wide open as he comes towards the start-finish straight. Will he be able to do it? Let's take a look over here. Comes across the line, sets a 107.47, roughly 1,000th of a second faster than Elite, and manages to take provisional pole away from the Aston Martin driver, who unfortunately has no other choice but to concede the position. And by the looks of it, ladies and gentlemen, that will be the end of qualifying here in Brazil. So, ladies and gentlemen, your pole position sitter for this race will be Paul House. Elite will be sitting in P2 and BR4 in P3 with a 107.6. And we've got a very, very interesting race in store for you all today. Luckily, we've had no rain in qualifying. Hopefully, we have no rain in the race. We should have some good racing. That is incredibly close. 1,000th of a second separating Paul House. Fantastic stuff. Right then, ladies and gentlemen. 1,000th of a second. That is insane. But regardless, Paul House must be very, very happy with himself as he starts on pole position for the first race of the season. But a fantastic drive from the rest of these guys. Elite managing to only be separated by, of course, that little of a gap. Will be looking to take that position right back from him at the race start. Clear skies surround the area, so I think, and as we have, the pit crew T-posing in front of their own stands, it seems like we're all set to get the Brazilian Grand Prix underway. We will obviously be riding on board with Mitchell as he rides us through the opening formation lap and see what tire choices every single driver has opted to put on. Only 20 more seconds now left to go until we get underway. But Codemasters really needs to get their stuff fixed because this is ridiculous. Oh, and unfortunately Nova has left the session. Hopefully he's able to join back before the end of the formation lap. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we ride on board with Paul House as he rides us through this formation lap and sets the pace for the rest of the grid, and it gives us a chance to take a look at all the tires the drivers have opted to put on. So Paul House in P1, along with Big Bambino being the only drivers in the top 5 to put on the medium tires of compounds. Ella in P7 also opting to put on the mediums, followed by Pyro and Jaguar in P13 and P14. The rest of the grid opting to choose the hard tire, as that being the general consensus for the fastest tire choice to be on at the start of this race. So Paul House will obviously have the better grip coming into the start of the race, but as the race progresses and tires begin to wear out more and more, we'll have to see how this affects him going into this race. Elite and BR4, both in P2 and P3, have opted to keep the hard tire compound, maybe deciding that it's the better choice to be on for the late race. Obviously, it's hard to plan anything really in league racing when there's safety cars left, right, and center. But we should be in for some fantastic racing regardless. And as the drivers begin to warm up their tires and do their scheduled burnouts, it's only a matter of time now before we get the first race of the season underway. As we can see, Mitchell actually pulled away quite quickly and completed the formation lap relatively quickly, as the rest of the drivers are beginning to catch up. As we can see, a McLaren that has spun out in the distance. And as he comes into his final grid slot, we're all set to get the Brazilian Grand Prix underway. It's been a long awaited season. We've had a wonderful break time, and tons of new drivers have now entered Tier 1. It'll be interesting to see who comes out on top. It's lights out and away we go here. Paul House manages to get a decent start with Elite Spectre right beside him. We can see a car that has jumped up massively in the background there, and that seems to be in the form of Elite, who's managed to push himself up into P4 by the looks of it. We can see Paul House managing to retain P1 at this current stage, and BR4 has unfortunately lost his car there, maybe because of a slight tap-in from the cars behind him, has unfortunately dropped down as there's 3 wide heading into turn 1 from P5 to P7, and on top of that, it looks like Ella has managed to come out on top of this scuffle, and is actually going side by side with Staba on this occasion. Who's going to come out on top? They're still side by side heading into the next corner, and it seems like Ella with the inside line is managing to maintain that position and has managed to keep that position. It doesn't seem like Staba is going to be diving down the inside just as yet, as there seems to be a bit of a tapping there from the backside from BR4. Regardless, Paul House has managed to keep P1 at this current stage, but he's very closely followed behind by Big Bambino, who's actually on the medium tire compound. Big Bambino was the one who's made the massive jump as he's on the medium tires. And it seems like the hard tires are having a very tough moment in this race as they're struggling for grip. Looking down the grid, we can see BR4 very close behind Staba. So a very chaotic and a very nice start to this race, as we've seen. Paul House has managed to keep the lead of this race at this current stage. Will Staba be looking to make a move, diving down the outside? We'll have to see. Has actually managed to make the move before the corner even finishes, and has managed to promote himself up into P6. Looking down, but meanwhile, Staba is not done with BR4 just as yet. Maybe thought about making a dive down the inside. Can't do anything on this occasion. Has to tuck in right behind him, as unfortunately going to have to sit behind him until he can see a possible opening. Looking up the grid, meanwhile, Ella is getting very close behind his teammate. We'll have to see if there's any team orders in effect at Mercedes. But by the looks of it, doesn't seem to be the case just as yet. Meanwhile, up the grid, we can see Big Bambino is currently only 4/10 behind Paul House. So these medium runners now very much pulling away from the rest of the grid, as the gap to the next hard runner, who is in P3, is roughly 1.4 seconds. So these medium drivers showing that there is definitely no room for error for them. Meanwhile, Ella, roughly 4/10 separating him and his teammate. There doesn't seem to be any team orders at this current stage. Possibly a bit too early for that. But obviously they're going to have to come up with something. As we can see, BR4 is now managing to catch up to the Mercedes. Looking down the grid, we can see Pyro maybe looking to make a possible move on Jaguar. He's thought about maybe going around the outside, but thinks better of it. Decides to tuck right back into his slipstream. Maybe going to wait for the DRS to get enabled before he can make any sort of lunges. And once again, Ella closing the gap to Stell. But no moves coming out of these drivers just as yet. Pyro, after his horrifying qualifying, has actually managed to get a fantastic start and managed to push himself up into P9. And while we have a chance, let's take a look at who has made up the most positions. So we can see Jaguar currently in P8 has made up 6 positions, with Pyro making up 4. So a fantastic start from both these drivers, as they've made up the most amount of positions out of everybody in this race. Steba, on the other hand, currently sitting in P7, 4/10 behind BR4. And Paul House once again repeatedly setting the fastest laps of this race. .310 separating Steba and BR4, but with DRS wide open, obviously we'll have to see if any drivers will be able to make any sort of pushes. Unfortunately, not on this occasion, as BR4 did have the DRS from the car ahead, but is slowly slipping out of that DRS zone. He's going to have to definitely pick up the pace if he has any chances of keeping the cars behind him at bay. And our interest will also remain with Big Bambino, who is within a second of Paul House. So how will your race leader defend from this position? We will have to see as they come towards the end of Sector 2. And as they drive through the DRS detection point, it doesn't look like Big Bambino is going to be slipping out of that DRS zone anytime soon. So let's ride on board with him and see if he manages to gain any sort of time. Doesn't seem to be the case. Paul House may be using a bit of his battery to keep Big Bambino at bay. And heading down into turn 1, no dives just as yet. Seems like no driver was really able to make a move on this occasion, unfortunately. But once again, with DRS wide open once more, it's still a bit too far back. He can't make any sort of lunges from there. He's going to need to be a bit more patient than that. And we can see Stell has now managed to close up to P3. So Spectre has problems of his own to look after, despite and regardless of the position he's at right now, he's going to have to try to make the most of it. We can see Steba now 2/10 behind BR4. This is the difficult part about Brazil. It's that it's such an easy track to lose the car at, that you need to be careful on almost every other corner. Plus, not to mention, when you're following a car as closely as these people are with all this dirty air, it makes it just that much easier to maintain the same pace for each lap, for lap after lap after lap. But Ellis looks like he's going to be facing problems of his own, 9/10 behind his teammate, with BR4 right behind him. Will he be able to defend this position as they head down into turn 1? We can see, oh, we saw Stell maybe making a potential move on Elite, but it was a bit too far back, unfortunately. Meanwhile, Big Bambino is closing up on Paul House as they head down towards the second DRS zone. Can't make a move just as yet. You see, Ella thought about maybe diving down the inside. So lap 6 of 36, we've had a few position changes. Paul House, who managed to take provisional pole, is still leading your race, with Big Bambino right behind him. A few interesting battles to keep an eye on. We have Ella and Stell, who Both the Mercedes drivers currently sitting P4 and P5 fighting their own battles as Stell is catching up to P3 in the form of Elite, and Ella is having to defend from BR4 and Steba right behind him. As we can see, this massive DRS train following from P3 all the way down into P8. And the problem with DRS trains is just that it's very difficult to overtake cars, especially on the straights, because everyone has a DRS. This makes it kind of like an even playing field for everyone. Once again, a bit too far back for the Williams to make any sort of moves on the Ferrari. So after what was a fantastic race start, we have had a bit of a dull few laps here, as drivers begin to size each other up, building up potential overtakes on each other. And we can see Ellis once again close the gap to his teammate. No team orders at Mercedes just as yet, possibly because of the fact that there's too many cars next to each other to maybe make any possible switches without compromising the other driver. And massive credit to Elite as he manages to keep a hold of his position. But as I say that, Stell now going down the inside into turn 1. Will he be able to make the move? Yes, he does. Heading into turn 1, manages to make the overtake. Elite thought about maybe making the switchback, but can't do anything just as yet. And now Stell gets promoted up into P3. But it's not over just as yet, as the DRS opens up right back for Elite. And will he make a dive down the inside or the outside? No, he will not. So it's safe to say Stell has managed to confirm that overtake and has managed to promote himself safely up into P3. Let's go back up the grid and look at the battle going on between P1 and P2 at this current stage. So lap 8 of 36, 3/10 separating these drivers. They've gone continuous laps behind under the DRS conditions, and still nothing as yet. So it's safe to say Paul House is definitely saving some of his battery up to use against him on each of the straights. And as once again they head back into turn 1, it just does not seem like Bambino has enough pace to maybe catch up to Mitchell. But as I say that, BR4 is actually has enough pace to catch up to Ella. Thinks about diving out the outside, but Ella actually blocks it off very, very nicely. They're preventing BR4 from making any sort of overtakes and keeps him in P6. Looking up the grid, will Spectre be able to make an overtake on Stell and maybe take back P3? No, he will not. Not on this occasion. Trocker actually very, very close behind Ishtar. 4/10 separating these drivers. There is a ghosted Aston Martin in front of them. Hopefully it doesn't hinder them too much. As this DRS train continues, no overtakes once again. We saw BR4 was very close on the previous lap. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like he's close enough on this occasion. Ella, on the other hand, very close behind Elite. As he looks down to dive around the outside, DRS wide open. He has his teammate right in front of him, maybe possibly not allowing him to make an overtake. And never mind, Elite actually manages to make a dive on Stell. It didn't seem like Stell was within an overtaking range, but regardless, Elite managed to make a fantastic overtake and gains a lot of time on the Mercedes drivers. Meanwhile, we can see almost 3 wide heading into the next corner, but we can see the Alpine Esteva decides to back off as BR4 dives down the inside and manages to promote himself up into P5. And Esteva now getting very interested in this compromised Mercedes. Thought about maybe making a move around the outside, but the Mercedes covers the exit off very, very nicely, so he'll stay in P7. BR4 gets promoted up into P5, and Stell unfortunately drops down into P4 after getting overtaken by Spectre. So that's what I'm talking about with DRS trains. It just takes one tiny slip up. That's all it takes. One simple mistake to change the entire grid order around. And obviously Stell will not be happy with himself after losing out on P3. I did not think that he... Oh, and as I say that, Elite has actually managed to spin out and has completely lost his car there. And we can once again see a bunch of overtakes taking place. No safety car just as yet. We can see Ella and BR4 going side by side with each other heading into turn 1. Who's going to come out on top? There is a bit of wheel banging going on between the drivers, but it doesn't seem like there's any big collisions. Meanwhile, they're still side by side heading through turn 1. And it seems like the Mercedes is going to be able to retain that position. But with the Red Bull now dropping down a position, will he be a bit compromised by the Alpine? It doesn't seem to be the case. DRS wide open as BR4 once again attempts to make an overtake on the Mercedes, but it won't do anything just as yet. And we can see Steva now going side by side with the Red Bull, and unfortunately once again cannot make any moves. And unfortunately it seems like Elite has DNF from this race. What happened there? He completely lost his car and then unfortunately spun it around. And with that, it allowed Stella and Ella to go back up a position. And once again, BR4 going side by side with Ella. But nothing doing yet. These Mercedes drivers once again covering off their corners very, very nicely as they once again go side by side. BR4 going to try to go around the outside. But unfortunately, Ella has just the better grip with those medium tires. And we will be able to maintain that position at this current moment. We've had some fantastic driving from these midfield drivers at this current stage, and we can see Steva now getting very close behind the Red Bull as both the Alpine and now the Red Bull going side by side heading into turn 1. DRS wide open as they gain on the Mercedes, and it seems like Steva is going to be able to make the overtake before the corner, and Steva now manages to promote himself up into P5. And through all that commotion, so much action in just the span of like 2 laps. Fantastic driving we've seen here. Unfortunately for Spectre, who's spun out in DNF from this race, he was looking in a very good position to maybe come in to finish on a podium position, but that's racing for you, that you have to be careful, and you never know when everything could just flip right back on you, because we can see Ishtar actually managing to get going side by side with Trocker on this current occasion, and Ishtar with the inside line manages to keep the position, but Trocker not done with him just as yet. Unfortunately, a bit too far back to make any more dives down the inside. Oh, you can see Bambino has actually managed to close the gap to Paul House on this occasion as well. With DRS wide open, it's unfortunately just not enough. So they always start on 3/10 heading through the final corner of the straight, but it always seems like Paul House is just able to retain that position. Meanwhile, Ella thinks about maybe diving down the inside of his teammate, but decides to go for safe driving and doesn't, and just opts to stick right behind him once again through the DRS zone. Meanwhile, Trocker closing in the gap to Ishtar, once again going on in the inside. Ooh, there's a bit of wheel banging there from between the drivers. Ishtar goes off of track, and Trocker unfortunately spins it at the curb and drives straight and reverses straight into the barrier there. Hopefully he doesn't experience any wing damage from that, but going back up the grid, we can see Steva and Ella coming very close together now. There's a bit of action back there, so fortunate for Trocker as he made it his overtake. He did spin out, but Ishtar manages to retain P9. Oh, we can see Steva's completely lost the car. What happened there? Steva was behind everybody else. It didn't seem like he came into collision with anyone. Maybe just going on the gas a bit too quickly there, and unfortunately loses the car and drops down into P8. Very unfortunate for him. Meanwhile, Ella once again closing on his teammate. Won't make any dives on it just as yet. They're just pulling each other along here, trying to create a bit of a gap to BR4, who is unfortunately out of DRS's range. And then saying that Jaguar now and currently in P6 is within DRS range of BR4. So BR4 is going to have to probably use a bit of his battery now to start defending from the cars behind him. Lap 14 of 36. No safety cars, no VSCs just as yet. We've had a few incidents on track, but nothing serious. And that DRS train has managed to massively close down from P4 to only P6. It was from P3 to P7. As they head down turn 1. No overtakes once again. Mercedes swapped around. Oh, it seems they did, yeah. So now Ella has actually been given the green light to go ahead of his teammate Stel. So that Mercedes switch that has been building for quite a few laps now has finally come underway. And it seems like Ella has now been allowed the green light to push as Stel tries to keep up with him. But that switch around did allow BR4 to slightly catch up to the Mercedes drivers as that gap has come down to within a second. Oh, as he drives massively over the curves there, I wouldn't be surprised if he suffers from a bit of, if he gets a potential track invalidation from that one, but thankfully for him, no penalties just as yet. No penalties from anyone, as a matter of fact. And we can see Bambino has actually dropped considerably off of Mitchell, and Bambino becomes the first driver of this race to come in for a legitimate pit stop. So what kind of snowball effect will this cause? It doesn't let Ella come into the pits. What about anybody else? Has any other driver decided to come into the pits? Nobody has just as yet. 20 laps to go, and it seems like Bambino has put on the hard compound of tires, possibly looking to undercut Mitchell. And how will the rest of the drivers respond? We will have to see. As Bambino comes out in P8. And after that switch around, we can see that Ella is beginning to kind of actually make a bit of a gap to Stel. We saw he was stuck right behind his Mercedes teammate, but at this occasion he's managed to push, and we have a yellow flag in Sector 3, and that is Adam, who's unfortunately lost his car around. But seeing as how Bambino pitted the last lap, it's only logical that Paul House now comes into the pits this lap. So now Mitchell coming into the pits this lap. Will Ella follow suit? No, he will. Yes, he will. No, he will not, actually. Okay. So there was a bit of a moment there where I wasn't sure if he was going to dive into the pits with him, but he did. But he didn't. And now we'll have to see, will Paul House come out in front of Bambino? Will Bambino's undercut plans work? We will have to see. And it doesn't seem to be the case. It just seems... Oh, actually, it might actually be a lot closer than I think, as both drivers are now coming out on nearly side by side into the DRS range, and it doesn't seem like Bambino's plan worked out to the best. We can see Paul House weaving left and right, trying to get some heat into his tires as he comes out of the pits in P5. And at this current stage, Ella is the only driver on the mediums who hasn't decided to come into the pits there, and Paul House desperately trying to get some temperatures into his tires. Oh, and then because of those cold temperatures, it seems like Bambino's actually going to make the dive down the inside and now the outside. Around the outside he goes up Paul House, and with those with those heated up tires, he does manage to make the overtake stick and has managed to undercut Paul House. After Paul House, of course, had to struggle with those cold tires, but once those tires warm back up, we'll have to see if Mitchell can bounce right back at him. And we can see Ella now finally opting to go into the pits. Looking up the grid, BR4 and Stel, who are currently leading this race, separated by nearly 0.3 of a second. This is the closest battle on track at this current stage. We can see Steba has now managed to overtake Ella. No moves just as yet. We can see Paul House has actually... Oh yeah, he's definitely come out ahead of his teammate. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure of that. We can see Mitchell is slowly gaining on Bambino. Doesn't look like it's enough. It seems like Mitchell is probably going to be stuck in the same limbo situation as Bambino was for the first few laps of this race. But as we're halfway through here, it's only a matter of time before some of these hard runners decide to come in for their pit stops to switch on to the mediums. And we can see actually Stel has opted to come into the pits, and that promotes BR4 into P1. So now Stel being the first driver out of the hard runners to now come into the pits, followed by Steba, who's following right after him. We'll have to see what kind of domino effect this causes behind him. Ishtar decides to stay out. What will Jacko Lacko do? And we can see Mitchell still very close behind Bambino. DRS wide open. It'll be very difficult for Bambino to defend on this occasion as Mitchell dives down the inside and manages to make the overtake stick and promotes himself once again back up ahead of Bambino into the provisional P1. BR4 still hasn't pitted just as yet. 18 laps old are his tires. As he still has moved on to the medium compounded tires. Steba and Strocker following suit. Strocker now comes out of the pits.